Hi, my name is Rudolf and this is my guide to Choker. Choker is a brand new game that combines the brilliance of chess with the cunning of poker. I'm not a poker player myself, but I got addicted to the game immediately. I'm just excited about seeing what pieces I get and how can I make the most out of them. Every game, every initial position is different. In the following string of videos, I'm going to give you insights to the game and tips and advice on how can you become a better Choker player. And then you will end up beating me. But well, I guess that's the purpose of these videos. A game of Choker consists of 3 phases: the betting phase, the placement phase, and the chess phase. In the betting phase, you'll be dealt 5 cards. A Choker deck consists of 44 cards in total. There are 4 queens, 8 rooks, 8 bishops, 8 knights, and 16 pawns. Remember that your cards can change value. They may promote or demote to another piece. More on this in our videos about promotion, demotion, the palace, and the empress. It's extremely important that you understand those specific Choker rules to decide how much to bet and how strong your hand will be. Next up is the placement phase. The initial position in Choker is the king on e1 and e8 and the pawns in front of it. Then the players will take turns to place their pieces on the board. The pawns can go anywhere from the 2nd to the 4th rank, while the pieces should be placed on the 1st and the 2nd rank. Once the placement phase is over, the chess begins. The rules are the same as in traditional chess, but you will both start with 7 pieces each. And it's likely that the forces will be uneven, depending on what cards you have received. Due to this and the placement phase, there are many different starting positions in Choker. How many in total? An estimated 82 trillion starting positions. That makes Choker a very colorful and rich game. Promotion in the betting phase of Choker occurs when a 3rd, 4th, or 5th pawn is received. A 3rd dead pawn will become a rook, and a 4th or 5th dead pawn will turn into a queen. Let's take a look at this example where white, after 2 pawns, receives a bishop and a 3rd pawn. This pawn will turn into a rook automatically, but notice how the letter in the upper left corner remains a P, pawn. The original value of the card will be important for the possibility of further promotions. That's exactly what happens in our second game, where white, after 2 pawns, a 3rd pawn and a bishop, where the 3rd pawn, as you know, turns into a rook, receives as a 5th card yet another pawn. Therefore, white will end up with 2 pawns, a rook, a bishop, and a queen. Remember that the chess phase of Choker has the exact same rules as traditional chess, meaning that you can promote your pawns in that stage of the game too, when the pawn reaches the opposite side of the board. It can turn into a queen, a rook, a bishop, or a knight. Your choice. While receiving many pawns can promote your card to a rook or queen, getting many pieces of the same kind will have the opposite effect. If you are dealt more than 1 queen, 2 rooks, 2 bishops, or 2 knights, the extra pieces will be demoted to pawns. Let's take an example. Here white, as a 5th card, receives a queen, a 2nd queen, which automatically demotes to a pawn in the Choker app. But remember, the original value of the card remains a queen, and that's signaled in the top left corner. This will be important in other cases, such as our second example. Black first receives a bishop and a pawn, after which 2 more bishops follow. Therefore the 3rd bishop demotes to a pawn, but here comes the 5th card, and that is another pawn. What does it leave us with? Original values count. 3 bishops and 2 pawns make an empress. Therefore the previously demoted bishop now becomes a queen. And remember, promotions and demotions are always based on the original value of the cards. This is extremely important to understand, and here's a final, interesting but quite unlikely case to test your knowledge. What happens if you are given 5 rooks? What will that hand be like? The solution is 5 rooks will turn into 2 rooks and 3 pawns. The 3rd, 4th, and 5th rook will demote to a pawn, and those 3 pawns will not promote to anything. They won't become a rook as a third pawn, nor will make an empress together with the other two rooks, because these cards were dealt as rooks. Remember, it is the original value of the card that matters. If you receive 5 different cards in choker, it means you are lucky. Your pawn will promote to a queen. This is a special choker concept and is called the palace. Let's take a look at this example, where black after the 3rd and 4th card receives a knight as the final card that completes the palace and will promote the pawn to a queen. Therefore, the palace as a hand will always become 2 queens, a rook, a bishop, and a knight. The palace is one of the strongest hands in choker. It's a real powerhouse. But how likely it is that you will be dealt with one? We have prepared some cases for you that show the probability of receiving the 5th dream card. What full house is in poker will be the empress in choker, a 3 of a kind and a 2 of a kind, and will always promote the 3rd identical piece to a queen. Remember this example from our demotion video, where the previously demoted bishop becomes a queen after receiving the 5th card, a pawn. Let's take a look at another example. Here white after 2 pawns receives a rook and a 3rd pawn. That will promote to a rook, you already know this, but let's see the 5th card, which is another rook. Now that hand translates to 3 pawns and 2 rooks. Remember, it's the original value of the card that matters, and that is an empress. So now our pawn that promoted to a rook will promote to a queen thanks to the rule of the empress. In our final example, white after 2 rooks and 2 pawns receives a 3rd rook as the final card. You know that a 3rd rook would normally demote to a pawn, but here this is once again a 3 of a kind, 2 of a kind situation, the empress, and that will promote the rook to a queen instead of turning it into a pawn. Will you get an empress in your next games? Try your luck and see. Remember the basics we discussed about the placement stage in our video, The 3 Phases of Choker? Now it's time to delve deeper into the topic and give you tips on which squares are ideal for each piece. But first goes first, the order matters. Until the last piece is placed on the board, choker is a game of incomplete information. What cards does my opponent have? And in what order shall I play my pieces to get the most out of them? My advice is that you start with the less valuable pieces, the pawns and minor pieces. If you have a pawn, a good starting move as white would be to place it on f3 or d3. The initial position starts with an e2 pawn, which is isolated and therefore weak. If you have the possibility, connect it with a pawn or two, and that will strengthen your king position too. In our example, the f3 pawn closes the f-file, an open file through which the king could have been attacked, and it also creates an escape square for the king on f2 in case it needs to flee from a queenside attack. If black also has a pawn, a starting move to consider would be to either copy white's placement or use the same idea but on a different file. By placing the pawn on d6, now both the d and f files are closed, making the kings more sheltered from immediate attacks. Next comes the eternal battle, knights or bishops. The knight is my favorite piece in traditional chess, but in choker, I prefer the bishops. Why? Because the knight is a short-range piece. Just think about how many moves it will take for it to even give a check to the king on e8. While a bishop, if placed wisely, can almost immediately attack the opponent's king. Furthermore, since there are only 7 pieces for each player, the position, the battlefield, is wide open, and that favors the bishops. For these reasons, it is easier to use the knights as a defensive piece in choker, but on that role they can be brilliant, protecting important squares on both flanks. Plus, let's not underestimate how tricky of a piece the knights are. Watch out for tactical motives, especially in the heat of the time trouble. For the open nature of any choker starting position, the rooks and queens can be extremely powerful for immediate attacks. Place them on open files and your opponent will have to be defending from the very beginning of the chess game. If you have a second rook or queen to support your heavy piece, think of doubling them in the placement phase. To make the most out of your pieces as black, you can use all the previously mentioned tips, but add a hint of caution to them. Remember that since white goes first, your pieces can be immediately captured, or even worse, a mating attack can be launched against your king. The first move advantage in choker is way more significant than in traditional chess. Whether playing with white or black, if I have a queen, I do like to keep it as my final piece to place on the board. It creates an additional tension for my opponent and leaves them in uncertainty whether I have one or not. And it will change the evaluation of the position completely if a surprise queen or surprise queens appear on the board. As a general rule of thumb, focus on piece coordination already in the placement phase. In traditional chess, you need to develop your pieces first so that they can work together in the attack or defense. But in choker, you do have the advantage that you can choose starting squares that achieve that right from the beginning. Aim for setups that are harmonious and let your pieces work as a unit. Plus, always keep in mind the safety of your king. How do you feel about the order in the placement phase, and what are some of your favorite squares for your pieces? Who knows, maybe one day a choker opening will be named after you.